for today's movie review, I'll be reviewing the video game adaptation of Monster Hunter based on the Capcom video game series of the same name. And I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard Monster Hunter was gonna get a movie adaptation, I honestly thought it was a joke because I remember watching this one video from a long time ago which revealed not only plot details but also concept art, which consisted of a portal opening up with a Rathalos flying through it, attacking an airport, to some test footage of a Rathalos fighting a Gormagala at what appeared to be a mall, and even hearing certain plot details that the main character was going to be some young adult who would somehow find a way to drive the monsters back from our world to their world. But then suddenly, at the end of the video, they announced who the director was going to be, and it happened to be Paul W.S. Anderson. And then reality set in very quickly, and I realized that this was no longer a joke. This was serious. And I knew this movie was gonna be a mess for the simple reason that this was gonna be directed by the same guy who directed a good majority of the Resident Evil movies. And since then, the movies kind of remained hush-hush, and there was no word for it for a long time until 2019, 2020, and then that's when information started coming up. And apparently there were a lot of changes done to the script. Case in point, as I mentioned before, originally it was supposed to have a bunch of monsters entering our world with a young hero driving them back. Apparently, Paul Anderson decided to move away from that concept and move more in the direction of James Cameron's Avatar because of the oversaturation of movies based on young adult novels ranging from Twilight, The Hunger Games, to The Maze Runner, resulting in the movie that we got today. Now, I'll say this much, I never played too much of the Monster Hunter video games, but this much I could tell you, just based off everything I just told you, this movie is already inaccurate to the source material, because if you've ever played Monster Hunter, it's basically a fantasy action role-playing video game, in which you take the role of a hunter slaying or trapping large monsters across various landscapes. Not some action sci-fi shoot-'em-up video game. And if you're wondering just exactly how did Paul W.S. Anderson direct the movie that we got? Well, apparently, while moving past the young adult novel stage of the original draft for this movie, apparently back in 2010, there was some video game crossover event between Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker with Monster Hunter Freedom Unit, in which a military squad briefly fought a few of the monsters from the Monster Hunter series. I'm not sure just how true this information is, but apparently from that is essentially what led to the creation of the movie I'm about to review. Which begs the question, as far as a Paul W.S. Anderson video game adaptation is concerned, will it be good like the original Mortal Kombat, or will the movie be complete and utter trash in the same vein as Resident Evil: The Final Chapter? As for the plots of the movie, when Lieutenant Artemis and her platoon of soldiers investigate the disappearance of another platoon, they are soon transported to another world where they engage in a desperate battle for survival against enormous monsters. In their desperate battle for survival, Artemis soon stumbles upon a mysterious local huntsman whose superior combat skills allow him to stay one step ahead of these dangerous monsters. Can Artemis and the huntsman set their differences aside to fight the common enemy, or will Artemis remain stranded in this other world filled with monsters? Now, in terms of what I liked about the movie, I think the movie has some really good production values, from the CG to the costumes, starting with the main attraction of the movie itself, the CGI used to bring all the monsters from the Monster Hunter video game to life. The CGI used here is very well done and looks really impressive. And on top of that, the filmmakers really did a good job of translating the overall design aesthetic of the monsters from the Monster Hunter video games and making them look very convincing in a live-action movie like this. And as for the prop and costume designs, more specifically the props and costumes used for the monster hunters themselves in the later half of the movie, I think are, on a technical level, well crafted and look visually impressive. Sure, as far as the armors are concerned, they don't quite captured the essence of the type of armors you could have in the video game. Consider that within the context of the video game, when you go out and kill all these big monsters, you could take the parts of that monster and convert it into an armor, which is something that we don't see in this movie, but the costumes and armors that we do see, I thought looked pretty neat looking. And I think the practical effects used for the bow and arrow along with the giant sword look great. Sure, I think the sword could have been a lot bigger, but I appreciate the fact that the filmmakers went out of their way to attempt to make that weapon and make it look both cool and practical for a live action movie. Another aspect of the movie I liked has to do with the name of our main character, that of Artemis. Sure, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the most important detail. If anything, it's a bit on the nose, but given that this is a movie based on a series of video games in which you go out and hunt giant monsters, I think having the main character be named Artemis, referencing the Greek goddess of Artemis, who is the goddess of the hunt, to me made a lot of sense within the context of the movie. Another aspect of the movie I like is the visual storytelling, because a major rule in filmmaking is that a movie's story should be easy to understand through its visuals, even without any sort of dialogue present. And this movie definitely does a lot of that, where there's just points in time where a character would just be wandering from point A to point B, and there'd be no conversation or inner monologues. It's just the camera showing the character what they're doing at that exact moment. No matter if it's a character cleaning out their wound or simply observing the landscape and seeing how a monster reacts to a certain action. We essentially understand what the character is thinking and doing at that exact moment without any lines of dialogue present. Another aspect of the movie I liked are the action scenes themselves, because not only are there quite a few showcased throughout the whole movie, but when they do happen, I do find a lot of enjoyment in seeing our main cast of characters fighting the giant monsters in question. Sure, the editing could have been better in some cases, and there are some stupid moments that occur throughout each fight. That being said, I did find a lot of enjoyment in the action scenes themselves, with my favorite battle being Artemis and the Hunter fighting off the Black Diablos in the middle of the movie. Another aspect of the movie I appreciate is the attempt to add a mythology to the Monster Hunter universe, because in the video games there is no story and there is no core mythology. With the movie, I do appreciate that the filmmakers try to incorporate some kind of lore to this universe in regards to the Rathalos monster and its relationship with the Sky Tower. Sure, I don't think the execution of the lore is handled properly, which I'll explain later in the review, but I do appreciate that the filmmakers attempted to add a mythology to the Monster Hunter franchise. Now, as for aspects of the movie that I had mixed feelings on, honestly revolve around the Rathalos near the last act of the movie, because on pen and paper, having the main cast of characters battling the Rathalos during the climax, to me, made a whole lot of sense, considering that the Rathalos, of all the monsters, is the flagship monster of the Monster Hunter franchise. So ending the movie with the main characters battling the Rathalos seemed like a good idea on pen and paper. The execution, however, is where it falls apart, for a few reasons. Reason number one, the lack of any real build-up toward the Rathalos. Because in the last third of the movie, Ron Perlman's character establishes that the Rathalos is basically the boss monster guarding the Sky Tower, but the first two-thirds really don't foreshadow or build up the Rathalos being the big bad monster of the movie. Sure, you could make the argument that when Artemis first enters the Monster Hunter universe and we see what's left of the first company, where it's completely burnt and the sand surrounding the vehicle and corpses is turned to glass, that technically foreshadows the Rathalos, but there needed to be more build up to the Rathalos. As it is, when Artemis eventually joins the hunt with the other monster hunters to confront the Rathalos, it's just presented as yet another monster. Nothing more, nothing less. Reason number two, the fight with the Rathalos itself is not done properly, for the simple reason that it goes through three stages. Stage 1, Artemis and the hunters fight the Rathalos at the Sky Tower. Stage 2, Rathalos enters our world and proceeds to fight the military. Stage 3, Artemis and the hunter confront the Rathalos alone and manage to kill it. And the problem I have with this final conflict with the Rathalos is that during Stage 1 and Stage 2 of the fight, the movie makes it abundantly clear that the Rathalos is a very powerful monster, to a point that not only can it take on the military, who happen to have the most advanced weapons known to man, but it can also make short work of monster hunters who have way more experience than Artemis. So by the time you get to round 3, you think that Artemis and the Hunter's fight with the Rathalos is not going to only be very lengthy, but also going to be very intense, considering that it's just the two of them confronting the Rathalos, and Artemis has no real experience outside of killing the Black Diablos earlier in the movie. But when we do get to Stage 3, just as the final conflict is starting, it's over in a blink of an eye. And I found the way they killed the Rathalos to be very anticlimactic. Sure, Artemis was using some intel that was established earlier in that act of the movie by Ron Perlman's character before confronting the Rathalos, the monster. Reason number 3, the main cast of characters are using fire-based weapons against the Rathalos, which is a rookie mistake, because honestly, you should have used either dragon-based weapons to fight the Rathalos, or weapons that use a thunder element to it, not flame-based weapons. Keep in mind, I haven't really played too much of the Monster Hunter games, and even I knew better than to use flame-based weapons against the Rathalos. But still, I think the final fight with the Rathalos, on pen and paper, I could see why the movie would end with the Rathalos. I think it could have been handled a lot better. That being said, I really did enjoy the part of the final fight in which we got to see the Rathalos destroying the US military, for the simple reason that I thought it was really awesome in a stupid kind of way. And on top of that, I just think having the imagery of a Rathalos taking on the US military is a very surreal thing to see in a movie like this. Another aspect of the movie I have mixed feelings on is the interactions between Artemis and the Hunter. Because on the one hand, I do like how the movie tries to make these two understand each other, because they're both from two different worlds. No matter if it's the Hunter teaching Artemis how to properly survive in the environment, or Artemis learning details about the Hunter in regards to family life. Those moments I thought were very good. The thing that ruins the interaction between those two is the humor. To me, I found the humor to be very childish and kind of ruins the tone of the scene. Then again, the humor in this movie is also pretty bad altogether, but overall, the interactions between Artemis and Hunter when they're being serious, I think are good until the humor kicks in. Now, in terms of what I disliked about the movie, the first major criticism I have with the movie actually has more to do with Sony in regards to how they advertised the movie in regards to one particular scene, because they literally did the same exact thing they did with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, if you're confused by what I mean by this, think back to when you first saw the very first trailer for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and see all those clips of Spider-Man battling the Rhino. Now, because it's a trailer, you don't really know when or where that particular scene is going to happen. And the first time I saw the trailer, I speculated, okay, this is either going to happen at the very beginning or at some point throughout the movie. Turns out, when we see Spider-Man fighting the Rhino in the actual Rhino suit, that turned out to be the very last minute of the movie. So basically, Sony spoiled the final moments of the movie in their first trailer. And Sony did the exact same thing with this movie, with the Gormaga dragon. Because in the very first trailer, we see a glimpse of the Gormaga flying at our main cast of characters. And again, we don't know context behind why our main cast of characters are fighting the Gormaga. We think, okay, maybe this is something that's going to occur throughout the movie. But with the movie, turns out the Gormaga doesn't show up until the final minute of the movie. So Sony spoiled the final few moments of this movie in their first trailer, repeating the same mistake they made with the first trailer for The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Another problem that I have with the movie has to do with the landscape, because within the context of the video games, you hunt different monsters in different locations. Some of the locations can consist of being deep within a woodland area, a tropical rainforest, the ocean, an Arctic tundra-like landscape, a swamp, and yes, a desert. So on the one hand, yes, having characters fight monsters in the desert is accurate to the video games, but the thing is, we spend a good majority of the movie in a desert-like location. If I had to estimate the amount of time we spend in a desert-like area, the movie is an hour and 44 minutes in length. I think of that entire runtime of the movie, we spend about 95% of it in the desert, while the other 5% we spend in that tropical rainforest-like area that's not too far away from the Sky Tower. Now, keep in mind, I have nothing against movies set in a desert. I mean, look no further than the Indiana Jones movies. Some of those predominantly take place in a desert. But the thing is, they made good, interesting use of the landscape. And the landscape itself, depending on the scene, played an important role within the movie. With this movie, it's not interesting to look at, and it really has no bearing on the plot whatsoever. Also, speaking of the plot of the movie, perhaps one of the biggest problems with this movie is the plot, because the movie itself doesn't really have a plot, or if it does, it isn't brought up until the final 15 minutes of the movie. Seriously, from the time the movie begins, when Artemis is initially investigating the disappearance of the first company, up to Artemis getting rescued by Ron Perlman's character, there is really no plot to speak of in that time frame. It's characters arrive at this scene, characters get transported, characters encounter Diablos, most of them get killed by Diablos, then most of them get killed by the spider creatures, then it's Artemis interacting with the hunter for a bit, then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens. It's just a series of events and nothing more. And on top of that, the movie doesn't really answer all the questions that were brought up. Case in point, what led to that opening sequence of Artemis looking for the first company? Because after the initial intro with the introduction of Ron Perlman's character and the hunter being ambushed by the Diablos pair at night, we cut to our world, and Artemis and her platoon are already in the middle of their mission, and she is listening to a recording of the previous company being attacked by something. It almost feels as if we were missing several scenes that were supposed to lead up to this. From having that first company being transported and getting ambushed by a Rathalos off screen, which would then lead to the military trying to contact them and record the last few seconds of their battle, which leads into the introduction of Artemis and her platoon, and then they set off on their mission, eventually leading up to that moment of them arriving at that location of the first company's last known whereabouts before they disappeared. As it is, the movie just throws you smack dab right in the middle of a story that's already ongoing without all the setup needed to get to that moment. Then, of course, you have anything and everything that revolves around the Sky Tower that's protected by the Rathalos. Because for the first 2/3, when we're in the Monster Hunter universe, the characters see in the far distance the tower being surrounded by a storm, but we really don't know what it is for a good majority of the movie until the final 15 minutes, in which Ron Perlman explains, oh, it's a tower that's some kind of ancient technology created by the previous civilization that got wiped out, which is currently being protected by Rathalos. But even with that information, we still don't fully understand what the Sky Tower is. We know what it can do, but we don't really understand the full mechanics of it, or why it was even built in the first place. And this isn't some minor detail. The Sky Tower is a major part of the movie because it's the reason why the plot, and I'm using the plot loosely here, happens in the first place. And despite its relevance to the plot of the movie, the Sky Tower itself feels like a late addition to a point that I'm almost convinced the Sky Tower itself was added way later in the production of this particular movie. I'm not sure if that's the case, but that's what it felt like to me. And this is a major problem because the Sky Tower itself is not a minor detail. It's a major detail that's not fully explained. Also, another problem I had with the movie are the fight scenes between Artemis and the Hunter, because before those fights even occur, we see Artemis getting injured by one of the big spider monsters, and we see that she's wounded and limping. Yet, when we see her fighting against the Hunter, she's actually put up a really good fight against the Hunter despite having an injured leg. And my problem with that is, I feel that she should have struggled a lot more with the injury. As it is, when she fought the Hunter, it almost felt like she didn't have that injury to begin with. And I blame this on plot armor, only because I feel that's the reason why she was able to fight against the hunter as well as she did, was due to plot armor. Sure, she did technically lose the fight against the hunter, but she did better than expected, which is the takeaway from this. And of course, one of the more infamous problems that I have with the movie is something that many other people have pointed out already, which is the fact that the movie itself is not a fantasy movie. At least not in the way the video game is set up. And here's the thing, when it comes to Paul W.S. Anderson's filmography, outside of Mortal Kombat, all his other video game adaptations, which consist of predominantly Resident Evil along with Monster Hunter, are movie adaptations of video games that don't represent the video game very well. Now, I never played Resident Evil, but from what I could gather, it's a series of horror survival games. The movies are horror action, whereas Monster Hunter, on the other hand, as far as the video game is concerned, it's a fantasy action role-playing game set in a fantasy world. The movie, it's this action fantasy abomination as far as I'm concerned. And also, having the whole setup of having a group of humans from our world going into the Monster Hunter universe is an incredibly dumb idea to begin with. Now, remember, like I said at the beginning of this review, because with the actual video games themselves, it's set in its own fantasy world that comes with its own fish out of water element, because you, the player, enter a village that happens to have a guild, and there's already that built-in fish out of water element within the context of the video game and within that universe. The movie did not need to have a group of humans from one world travel over to another one. It didn't need to go in that direction. You easily could have had the movie set within a fantasy world, have a character from one village, learn about the whole Monster Hunter culture, have the character go through a montage of them becoming a Monster Hunter, and then proceed to have them hunt monsters from the video games. As opposed to this movie, which felt like it took more inspiration from the 2002 post-apocalyptic science fiction movie Reign of Fire, where you have a group of surviving English people led by Christian Bale who team up with a group of American mercenaries to fight off dragons. Just change a few elements around and you basically get that kind of movie, which on pen and paper, having a group of people from the military fighting giant dragon-like creatures sounds like an awesome idea for its own original IP, but not for a Monster Hunter movie. Now, granted, like I stated at the beginning of this review, supposedly the director took inspiration from some crossover event between Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker and Monster Hunter Freedom Unit back in 2010, but here's my takeaway if that is indeed the case. Just because you can take inspiration from that crossover event does not mean you should take inspiration from that event, because this tells me the director does not understand the source material very well. Because remember, the actual video game itself, you play as a character and you go around fighting giant monsters. That's it. There is no story to it. And while the movie technically does get that much right, in which the main character does indeed fight some giant monsters, the way it goes about it is poorly handled. Another problem I have with the movie is the character cast, because outside of Artemis and the Hunter, no one else in this movie matters. Because the thing is, with the first 20 minutes of the movie, the characters aren't there for you to get emotionally attached to. They're just there as fodder, nothing more, nothing less, to showcase how dangerous the Monster Hunter universe is in comparison. So really don't get a chance to latch onto these characters as they're being picked off one by one. And same goes with the group of hunters we see later on in the movie that aren't the Hunter or Ron Perlman's character. Again, they're just fodder, but we really don't get emotionally attached to them when they do bite the dust eventually. So for my final verdict of Monster Hunter, as a movie adaptation of a video game, it fails because it does not translate the source material properly into a movie format. And even if this movie wasn't based on a video game, I still don't think it's very good. Sure, while I do find the scenes of our main characters battling the giant monsters to be entertaining, the movies surrounding the monster action scenes, from the story, the world building, and the characters, I don't think are very good. If anything, I think the 2020 movie Love and Monsters is a much better Monster Hunter movie than the actual Monster Hunter movie. Sure, Love and Monsters might not have the iconic monster roster of the Monster Hunter video games, but I think that movie had a much better cast of characters, a better story, and better world building than Monster Hunter. So overall, Monster Hunter for me is a entertainingly bad movie. And before I give my final rating, what did everyone else have to say about Monster Hunter? So it looks like the movie got, not surprising, pretty negative reception. And so for my final verdict of Monster Hunter, I give it a 2 out of 5. So out of all the monsters within the Monster Hunter video game, which one's your favorite? And see you later.